Finding $10 on the street provides a brief moment of satisfaction, but losing $10 feels like a lasting psychological injury. Standard logic suggests these two events should cancel each other out. If you find $10 and then lose $10, your net wealth returns to zero. This is the core of expected utility theory. It assumes a linear relationship between objective wealth and subjective satisfaction, where every dollar added or subtracted carries the same weight. In this model, decisions are based on the cold math of probability. It treats human choice as a series of calculations performed without regard for emotional state. While this mathematical model functions in a spreadsheet, it fails to predict how people actually respond to gains and losses in the real world. In 1979, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky published research that challenged these classical assumptions. Their work demonstrated that human decisions deviate from logical models in predictable ways, a discovery that would later earn a Nobel Prize. They found that we do not evaluate our total state of wealth. Instead, we evaluate gains and losses relative to our current position. Specifically, they measured a consistent imbalance. The psychological impact of a loss is roughly twice as strong as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. This is prospect theory. The curve for gains is a shallow rise. Each dollar feels less rewarding. But the left side curve for losses is convex and significantly steeper, representing a 2-to-1 ratio of pain. A $10 loss drops twice as far as a gain rises. This asymmetric curve describes the bias that drives market exits, strategic investments, and personal life choices. To understand why our brains produce this lopsided math, we have to look at our biology. Our nervous system does not process a financial loss as a simple calculation error. It processes it as a physical threat. Brain scans show that financial losses activate the amygdala, the same region responsible for processing fear and physical pain. This threat response was an evolutionary advantage. For early humans, the risk of losing food or shelter was far more dangerous than the benefit of finding extra resources was helpful. Today, these ancient survival mechanisms continue to fire in modern environments, even when the threat is purely financial. This biology explains why it is so difficult to walk away from a failing project or an investment that has lost value. We call this the sunk cost fallacy, a cognitive trap that makes us double down on losing positions. Admitting a project has failed forces the brain to record a definitive loss. This finality triggers the amygdala's pain response. As an asset drops, it moves down the steep side of the prospect curve. To avoid a final exit, the brain prefers the slow bleed of decline. This vertical gap represents the psychological penalty the investor avoids. By staying, they keep the loss unrealized. This leads to the irrational decision to add more time or money to a losing hand, simply to delay the moment the loss becomes official. The refusal to accept a psychological loss often results in a mounting financial one.
Now, consider the opposite scenario, a stock that is rising, or a project that is succeeding. Logic suggests we should feel nothing but reward, but as soon as a gain appears, the brain's focus often shifts from the joy of winning to the fear that the gain will disappear. This is the dispossession effect, the urge to sell a winning investment too early just to lock in the profit. On the shallow gain side of the curve, the satisfaction of a further increase is small compared to the pain of falling to zero. Investors reach a threshold where the fear of losing their gain overrides the logic of holding for more. This creates a direct inconsistency. We sell our winners early to avoid the pain of a potential drop, but we hold our losers too long to avoid the pain of a certain drop. Loss aversion forces us to invert rational strategy. We exit the positions that are working and stay in the ones that aren't. Ownership itself changes the way we assign value to objects and ideas. In a famous experiment, Kahneman and Tversky gave random participants coffee mugs and then offered them the chance to sell them. The results showed a consistent gap. The owners demanded twice as much money to sell their mugs as potential buyers were willing to pay. This is the endowment effect. Once you own something, giving it up feels like a loss. Your brain automatically inflates its value. Ownership shifts your baseline on the prospect curve. Selling the mug isn't a neutral exchange. It's moving into the steep loss quadrant. This effect applies to more than just physical objects. It explains why we often reject better career or life opportunities. Leaving a current routine or identity feels like a loss. The potential upside of a new situation must be significantly larger to overcome the pain of giving up what we already have. We routinely choose to stay in a mediocre current state, rather than take a calculated risk on a better future. Perhaps the most significant consequence of loss aversion is how we are influenced by semantic framing. Because we measure value relative to a baseline, changing the way a choice is described can shift the final decision, even when the facts remain the same. Kahneman and Tversky demonstrated this using a high-stakes medical scenario. In the first group, doctors described a surgical outcome as having a 90% survival rate. When framed as a gain, lives saved, the vast majority of people chose to have the surgery. But in the second group, the exact same statistical outcome was described as a 10% mortality rate. Even though the math is identical, most people in this group rejected the treatment. This is the framing effect. By using the word mortality, the description places the outcome in the context of a loss. On our model, the word mortality pushes the decision point into that steep, painful quadrant on the left side of the graph. The underlying facts did not change at all, but the shift in language triggered an entirely different behavioral response. To make better decisions, we must learn to look past the frame. By translating every choice into absolute values, we can override our automatic responses and act on logic rather than loss.